Watching News at Prime, let's bring you this conversation now. A boost for the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's fiscal framework as the Finance Committee in Parliament has endorsed his speech. This was Godongwana's third bid to get the national budget passed after the outrage over two proposals, particularly on the VAT increase. Meanwhile, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts chairperson Songezo Zibi is warning of dire consequences if the budget is not passed at the end of July. Mr. Zibi joining us now for a conversation around what these consequences might be. Mr. Zibi, good evening to you. Thank you very much for your time. It does appear that the Finance Committee has given the thumbs up to the fiscal framework. Are you still just as worried that come July, we may not have the rest of the steps that need to be taken passed?
Good evening, Claudia. No, this is an extremely important step that the Joint Standing Committee on Finance took earlier today to vote to approve the fiscal framework, because failure to do so would have meant that the 120-day period that is allowed in legislation within which to operate at 45% of the already approved budget would expire, and we would then move to operating on 10%, which means you can only operate essential services only. Other things like salaries and so on, you can't. The step today is really important for two reasons. One, it means that the budget will be approved on the 30th of July. The second thing is that it means that the interest that the government pays on government debt is less after this afternoon's vote, which is a good thing. South Africans pay less of their taxes towards debt.
Before we get to the consequences of what might happen if this entire budget is not seen through, talk to us about the situation that at least we're reading about that was taking place within that Finance Committee meeting, because the understanding is that there was tension on the other end. The EFF was in court trying to fight the implementation of the fuel levy. Just how tense has this moment been?
Well, it's been tense for some time, because I think there has been a politics where, on the one hand, there are political parties which say we should not allow the government to collect any additional revenue. That's the effect of saying we don't want any tax increases, right? It means the government shouldn't collect any more revenue. So that's the argument on the one side. The other argument is that you need the government to collect some additional revenue because the situation since February has changed. Economic growth is less. The amount of money that SARS would have collected is less. That means you are facing budget cuts in what is called frontline services like education, health, infrastructure, and so on, which you also don't want. So you need to find a balance. And it's been very difficult to get all of the parties to align behind that point of balance. And I think the Joint Standing Committee on Finance has finally got the majority that it needs to say we can proceed on the basis of the current fiscal framework that has been proposed.
Well, but that remains to be seen whether this balance that eventually got the Finance Committee to pass this fiscal framework is going to be carried through. Let's talk about the dire consequences if by the end of July the latter steps of this budget are not seen through. What could be these consequences?
Well, let me just set out for the viewers at home to understand. So what happens is that when the financial year ends on the 31st of March, ordinarily, if we did not have this tension that you're talking about in three budgets, the government would have 4 months to use 45% of the budget that was allocated last year. So everything continues as normal for most of us. People get their salaries paid, projects continue, and so on. Usually, by now, the division of revenue bill, which is the allocation of money to national government, provinces, and local government, is done. So people have never had to worry about it. What could happen on the 30th of July, if the budget is not passed, is that permission to operate on last year's allocation would drop from 45% to only 10%, which means you can only pay for absolutely essential services. Everything else has to wait until the budget is passed, and that potentially means public servants wouldn't get paid. You wouldn't be able to get, especially in municipalities that really rely on the national government, their budgets would be delayed and a lot of public services would stop. That's an outcome I think we must all avoid because it would be irresponsible. There is time until October to fight further about what year 2 and year 3 are going to look like budget-wise.
Yeah, you speak about municipal services. It gives me a leeway to try and sneak in this question because we do know next year it is local government elections. How much political mudslinging is there during this period of the budget? Because parties like yours are being framed as those that are anti the people because you are for the fuel levy, for example, that is going to essentially mean that the cost of living crisis gets even harder in the country. When you are being painted in that picture, do you think that this is part and parcel of the political game going towards the campaigns for local government next year?
No, absolutely, Tloli, and it's irresponsible. Let me make a couple of examples, Tloli, about what these budget allocations are supposed to pay for. There was 29 billion that had initially been allocated for the extension of public health services to South Africans who need them. That has been cut to about 19 billion. So we've lost 10 billion. The extension of education services, early childhood development, has been cut by another 9 billion, for example. Trains at PRASA that so many South Africans need because they are cheap and much safer, that has been cut back as well. So as people talk about what the revenue measures are, we must also put in human terms the impact of cutting allocations in terms of budget. Because for some people, it might be easy to say, I don't care that public health services are not going to be extended because they've got medical aid, which is paid for by taxpayers here in Parliament. But for people who need to go to a clinic and have been waiting for one for 10, 15 years, that's not a good thing to say to them. And when those people don't get those services, the same political parties will not take responsibility for it. So it's playing politics, it's irresponsible, and it's also misleading.
Final question, Mr. Zibi, and I couldn't have let you go without bringing into the equation the Road Accident Fund. This is now a completely different subject. I had the man who runs the entity who happens to be on suspension from now, and Collins Letsoalo did not have very nice things to say about you when I spoke to him because he says you are on some kind of campaign against him. He's now on suspension. Can I get your reaction to that? Is this a welcome development, or you think there's perhaps more that still needs to be done?
Look, one of the things any person who's the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts is that you are not going to be liked by everybody. You are not money. Some people are going to dislike you. It comes with a job, so I really don't mind. The suspension, by the way, we asked the board of the Road Accident Fund to get proper legal advice because they told us that the chief executive had been placed on special leave to go and reflect. Now, I have never heard in many years, decades of applying the Labor Relations Act myself as a manager and executive in the private sector, where somebody is placed on special leave to go and reflect. I myself said in the committee, talk to a proper labor lawyer, explain the circumstances, and take steps which are in line with what is provided in the law. Either you suspend the chief executive or you let him come back to work. But this special leave, go and reflect business does not work. The board has taken a decision, I'm assuming following legal advice, to place the chief executive on suspension. It is not up to us to speculate on the appropriateness of that decision or not. But I'm hoping that they've taken proper legal advice as we advise them in our committee, and that advice is in the interest of the Road Accident Fund, its claimants, and the taxpayers who pay the fuel levy to fund the Road Accident Fund.
Your comments leave much to be desired about the steps of the board up until the point of suspension. Do you have confidence in that they know what they're doing?
Look, I will say this. We already expressed very emphatically that the board of the Road Accident Fund is not doing its job. And the minister needs to take such steps as may be necessary to make sure that the board is able to do its work. That may mean dissolving the board or strengthening it. But we were not satisfied at all by the quality of the governance at the Road Accident Fund right across the board, up to the point where the chief executive and another executive, so the chief executive told us that he is not going to come to Scopa to appear before Parliament, even though he's a public servant. And then another executive sent me a lawyer's letter to say, we must not even mention his name or job title in the committee proceedings on the basis of false information provided to the board and provided by the lawyers to the committee. That's not a good picture. I think public servants should always endeavor to account to the committee, and I think it is astonishing that you have public servants who say when they are called in, I'm not coming.
Songezo Zibi, thank you very much for your time and indeed your comments tonight. Always refreshing to hear your thoughts, telling it like it is. Songezo Zibi is the chairperson of the Standing Account on, or rather the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, also the leader of Rise Mzansi.